Now, this story recently on the CBC website, advocates for both gun owner rights and stricter firearms controls say police, the feds, and border services could take actions to help prevent massacres like the Nova Scotia mass shooting from happening again. Joining me to discuss this is Rod Giltaca of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Rod, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Todd.
All right, tell us all about the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. What are you guys all about?
Well, as far as the organization is concerned, we're, I guess you might call the reasonable gun lobby in Canada. We think that Canadians have owned firearms for good and sufficient reasons for a long time, since before Canada was a country, and we need to make sure that we come to the conversation in a mature, reasonable manner.
All right. So, what are some of your takeaways from this inquiry and this whole thing?
Well, I guess the takeaways might be in the form of the recommendations that we're making. So, certainly, police had known about this individual in Nova Scotia for well beyond a decade. They had the opportunity to use Section 117 of the Criminal Code, which would have allowed them to take a closer look at him, maybe search his home, his business, all the rest of that stuff. That never happened. This is a very clear-cut case of gun smuggling as well, and that's something that needs to be addressed. I think everyone agrees that as well.
Okay, so do you feel as though that this is obviously a highly politicized issue here? And not only in this country, but in the United States, we all know about that, what it is in the United States. But do you feel as though when something like this happens, that politicization, that polarization, can be kind of set aside, and we can have a conversation about this from all vantage points here, and just get the best outcome?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. And in this inquiry, we find, and this is the same in every single tragedy if you look back in Canada, throughout Canada's entire history. When something like this happens, all kinds of groups, they run in to use the victims of these crimes as a platform to get their message out, to get what they want. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the conditions of that specific crime. And we've led by example by not doing that whatsoever, focusing only on what happened in Nova Scotia, because that's how you do justice to the victims and the community. We want to know what happened there. There's a lot of, speculation about what happened there. We want to know exactly what happened and how to prevent it. So we've really stuck to why we were given that mandate in the first place, and that's important.
Yeah, it absolutely is important. So you talk about utilizing or using this as a political tool. The Trudeau government has been accused of doing this, and we know with Commissioner Lucky and her role or supposed role in all of that as well, in disseminating what firearms were involved here and photos of which firearms were involved here. Because the Liberals are moving towards legislation to crack down on some of these brands of firearms. Do you feel that the government's over-politicized this? What are your thoughts on that whole component of this?
Well, absolutely, and they absolutely have. It's not a theory. They have, and it's really awful. I think the thing that speaks most about what they've done here is, if you know the facts of this case, the facts of what happened in Nova Scotia on April 18th to 19th, 2020, if there was a gun ban on all guns in Canada for the preceding century, for 100 years, it still would have played out the same way. And that's part of this, of what happened there, that people can't gloss over. So basically, firearms were smuggled in from the United States, and we got guns banned in Canada. Yeah. And it's just wrong. And that's why we are opposing it.
All right, so none of the weapons used were legally obtained at all. That's just to make sure that we have that information correct, right?
No, they were not legally obtained. And one was sourced, well, I guess two were sourced in Canada, but one was a handgun from Heidi Stevenson. But the one rifle that he did have that was domestically sourced was obtained through fraud. But I'm a participant that has standing in the commission, so I can see all the evidence. It doesn't look like he used that rifle on anybody. All you need is one gun, and you could have used any firearm to do what he did. So he used the firearms that he smuggled in from the United States. So it's, again, we had a tragedy that is unimaginable, and everyone rushes in, including the Liberal NDP government, to use this a political platform, and it really is terrible.
Right, and everybody's nerves are frayed and emotions are high, so it's that opportunity to do so. Do you think that what are your feelings on Canadians in general and this whole file of gun control and legislation cracking down on gun ownership, and some would say unfairly targeting legal law-abiding gun owners?
Well, that's something that we oppose every day. And, I think something that people should remember is we've had guns, as I said, in Canada since before Canada was a country. When it comes to handguns, we've had handguns in this country for the last 100 years. We have a licensing system. We have very strict rules in Canada. Firearm owners tend to be the most meticulous, law-abiding people. And, it's having any of the firearms that have been banned. We've had those guns for a long time in Canada, and the gun ownership is nothing new. It's the politics that are new. And firearms are very important, unique property to people, and that's why they're not going to sit back and say, well, yeah, government, just take, for your own political purposes, just take whatever you want from me. It's not right. It's property, and that's why we're standing against it.
Okay, so when all is said and done, where do you feel this is going in 5 years? I know that you can't predict the future, but speculate. Where do you think we're heading?
Well, it's a complicated question. Certainly, the Liberals have decided to take all guns from Canadians. I mean, they started with some reclassification situations with the Order in Council, banning all the guns after what happened in Nova Scotia. What happened in another country, in Uvalde, they banned handguns in Canada. They're not going to stop, right? Because they'll always look at the next most dangerous gun that's left. So they're going to keep doing what they do. And in Canada, I think the complex part of this is, in Canada, the government has a lot of power. They can basically do anything that they want to you, and they've demonstrated that on many levels. So the good news out of that is what one government can do to you can be undone by another government. So the Liberals, in our opinion, have shown that they're not fit to rule because they can't deal with the difficult problems in our society. They can't deal with the violence. So they're taking it out on people for political purposes. We're hoping another government will come in and just bring common sense back to Canada.
All right, so that other government would be obviously the Conservative government.
Well, yeah, that's what we're hoping. We're not an organization, I'd say we are nonpartisan, but obviously we'll favor a government that will just treat gun owners fairly. We're not nobody's asking to have no licenses or, that we should have machine guns. Like, nobody's asking for that, despite what people would tell you. So, if the Conservatives can bring some common sense back to Canada, that's great. If they aren't, we're in serious trouble. But that's what we're hoping at this point, at least.
Now, you say that the Liberals want to take every gun away. That's not what they would say publicly. They would say that they have no target, pun intended, for long gun owners and hunters. That's never been vocalized, to my knowledge, has it?
Well, yeah, they say all kinds of things and don't mean them. So when Bill Blair was in the minister's seat and was in charge of gun bans and gun confiscation, he said, nothing that we're doing, this is almost a direct quote, nothing that we're doing is meant to affect the lawful activities of hunting or target shooting. Yet they took all of the firearms, like virtually all of them, that people used exclusively for sport shooting. They tell us that they respect us, but it's like, well, we're still going to take your property anyway, even though none of you are responsible for what happened. Or no domestic firearms were found to be used in Nova Scotia. So they say one thing and do another constantly. So the stuff has to stop because it's pitting groups against each other. It's making people responsible for crimes they had nothing to do with. It doesn't make any sense, and it's really hurting Canadians.
Rod, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care. Rod Giltaca of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Now, we